All right, the video part 1 for 9.4 on factoring. We are going to talk about another form for our equation, and there's a new skill that you're going to have to learn called factoring. So just real quick, we've got two kind of vocabulary terms. One is a property, one is a term. Factored form. Factored form means that I'm going to take an expression, I'm going to write it as a product of expressions rather than a sum or difference. So for example, 3 times x plus 2 and y times 4 minus w are in factored form. 3x plus 2 is really the same as 3x plus 6, right? So factored form is writing it as 3 times x plus 2 rather than 3x plus 6. Another example of this would be a factored form might look something like this: x plus 2 times x minus 6. And we're going to see how to do that here in a little while. The zero product property. The zero product property is pretty simple. It sounds more complicated than it actually is. It says if the product of two more factors equals 0, so if the product of two or more factors equals 0, then at least one of the factors equals 0. So let me put it on really easy terms. If I said 3x equals 0, that's the product of two factors, and it equals 0, then I know that x has to be 0. If I said a times b equals 0, I would know that at least one of them would be 0. So a could be 0, b could be 0, or they could both be 0. But one of them has to be 0 if I know that the product is 0. So we're going to use that actually in our factored form here. So for example, if we have a product of expressions, so like x plus 2, and x minus 3, and the product of all of those equals 0, then one of those has to equal 0. So if x could be 0, you could say x plus 2 could be 0, or x minus 3 could be 0. Any of those parts could be equal to 0, or all of them, or two of them, but we know for sure that at least one of them has to equal 0. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking something in general form. So just a reminder, general form of our quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. So if you're given something that's in general form, that's in this form, and remember this is when a does not equal 0, because that would just give us a linear equation because this term would be gone. We're going to work on factoring it, which means we're going to write it as a product of binomials. So we're just going to write down these steps. These will make more sense as I go through some examples. So step 1, find out what the factors will look like. So if the constant, okay, so the constant term is c, okay? So if the constant is a positive number, then you know that that the two binomials are x plus and x plus, or x minus and x minus. We'll talk about that in a minute. If the constant is negative, if c is negative, or if it's a minus c, then I know that the two terms are going to be x plus something and x minus something. This is just basically what we knew already, that a positive times a positive is positive, a negative times a negative is positive, and a positive times a negative will give us a negative. Number 2, we're going to find the numbers that multiply to the last term and add to the middle, and then we're going to check our answer by FOILing. So let's look at some examples of this. So first thing I'm going to do is decide on what my terms are going to look like. The last term, the constant here, is positive, so I know it's going to be either x plus and x plus, or x minus and x minus. And what I'm actually going to do is, when we think about FOIL, I'm trying to get something that once I FOIL these two binomials, I will get this trinomial, x squared plus 10x plus 25. So I want the last two terms to multiply to 25 and add to 10. And if I think about the factors of 25, it could be 1 and 25, or it could be 5 and 5, and those are the only factors. And if I add 1 and 25, I get 26, which is not the middle term. If I add 5 and 5, I get 10, which is the middle term. So 5 and 5 must go in my last spot there. Now let me show you how this works and how I can do this so quickly. I know the tricks. I know that I have to have two numbers that multiply 25 and add to 10, but really the whole purpose of this is that when we FOIL, our first term, so remember f, is going to give us x times x, that's going to be x squared. So that's how I know that when I write a binomial, I'm always going to start with the letter x, at least so far, because the first term is x squared. So x times x is the only thing that will get me that first term, okay? Then I know that the outside, that's the O, FOIL, the outside, x times 5 will give me 5x, and the inside, 5 times x, will give me another 5x, and those added together equal 10. That's why our two numbers out here, when they're multiplied by x and added together, need to equal the middle term. And then my last step is L. That would be the last terms, 5 times 5, and that's 25. And when I combine like terms, I get back to where I started. So I'm just checking my work. This step right here is just to check. Yes, okay, these two binomials equal this trinomial. So my answer, my final answer for this one is x plus 5 times x plus 5. Okay? This is this trinomial written in factored form because it's written as the product of two expressions rather than the sum of expressions like it was up here. And they do equal the same thing. They're just written two different ways. So I'm going to do factored form for this one. It's plus 8. So I know that it's either going to be x plus something or x minus something. Always start with your x in the first spot. Since it's a positive 8 here, and I'm going to add this in a positive term here, I know they're both going to be plus because I have to add positives to get this term. And I know that these two terms have to add to give me 6. So I need to think of the factors of 8. They're 1 and 8, 2 and 4, and that's it. Well, I need them to add to give me 6. Well, 1 and 8 would give me 9, so I know it can't be those. And 2 and 4, okay, those would give me 6. So 2 and 4 have to be my terms in my binomials. That means I'm going to get, when I FOIL, I'm going to take first times first, so that's x squared, plus x times 4, that's my outer. Just did first times first, and then I did outer, that's 4x. When I do inner, I get 2x. And when I do last, I get 8. And simplifying, that would be x squared plus 6x plus 8. And yes, that does give me back to the trinomial where I started. So the factored form that I used was, so that means it has to be, sorry about that, that means it has to be x plus something and x minus something, because a positive times a negative will get me 24. So this is going to get a little bit more complicated. So I need to think of the factors of 24. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. And this time, since one is going to be positive and one is going to be negative, I have to think of their difference. I have to think of the difference between these numbers and try and get them to equal 5. So I'm going to think of 1 and 24, no. 2 and 12, no, that'd be 10. 3 and 8, no. 3 minus, oh, yep, 3 and 8. Okay, so 3 and 8 would give me a difference of 5. So I know 3 and 8 have to be my factors, or have to be my terms. Because, here's why. If I do a positive 3 times a negative 8, I'm going to get 24. If I do a negative 8 plus a positive 3, I'm going to get negative 5. They have to multiply to be the last term and add to be the middle term. So if I practice if I check my work, I get x squared plus negative 8x plus 3x minus 24. Get pretty quick at FOILing after you do it a lot of times. And that ends up being x squared plus 5x minus 24, which checks that means that I got the correct factored form. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and try 2.